After my last video on Inversion, I got the urge to replay the game that almost certainly inspired it. Prey, the 2006 one. This is the MC Escher meets Escher-Giger Flesh Sphere and Space Prey, and not the Art Deco Psychic Shadow Alien Bioshock Prey. Prey 2006 is a gimmick-filled linear action horror first-person shooter running on the id Tech 4 engine. I've got a lot more adjectives and nouns where that comes from. Prey was developed by Human Head Studios, who would only plummet like a snowball down Mount Everest after this game. These guys ended up developing The Quiet Man and Rune 2, both widely agreed to be some of the worst games ever made. Oh, how the mighty fall. Prey isn't without its own controversy, primarily owing to its 11-year development cycle from 1995 to 2006. At the time of release, the only game that had spent a longer time in development was Mother 3. In a rather hilarious twist, Prey started off in the hands of 3D Realms, who are also largely responsible for the infamous Duke Nukem Forever and its 15-year development cycle. Much like DNF, someone else needed to step in to actually finish the job for 3D Realms. Unlike poor old Duke, Prey has miraculously ended up becoming a cult classic of sorts. The ball wasn't dropped here. It's strange, charming, gimmicky, and disorienting. And if you know my channel, you know I have a strange love for quirky and disorienting things. So how does Prey hold up today? Is it the supreme sickness simulator shooter? Let's find that out. Oh, but to quickly get the name thing out of the way, since I won't bring it up again, this game has nothing to do with 2017's Prey made by Arcane. Well, nothing in common except the name. In fact, Prey 2017 was allegedly going to be called Neuroshock, but that fell through thanks to the suits at Bethesda who currently own the Prey IP, which does include Prey 2006. I have no idea why they thought that this would be a good idea. I personally generally despise this trend of naming reboots, in quotes, after older titles, and I think this is one of the worst examples out there because of how confusing it tends to be. Also, admittedly, I like 2017 Prey more, but maybe I'll talk about that another time. Back onto 2006 Prey. Unfortunately, Prey is abandonware today, and thus it cannot be obtained by regular legal means. This game used to be on Steam, so you could theoretically get it through the dubious means that is key resellers. I wouldn't blame you if you trust them as much as you'd trust a man in a straitjacket in a dark alleyway. Physical copies are expensive, so unless you're willing to fork over some Washingtons as someone with no relation to developers, then you'll have to resort to the typical means of acquiring abandonware. I personally have a physical copy of the collector's edition, which is easily my most prized piece of physical gaming media. I don't own too much of this kind of stuff, so it is basically the default. I'm glad I just decided to wander into the video game aisle in my local bookstore that one day. Now, since I offhandedly mentioned it, you may want to know why this game is removed from Steam and all other digital storefronts. Well, it's all because of this Jukebox. No, really. The developers made the unfortunate mistake of putting a bunch of licensed music in this thing. The tracks didn't age badly, it's just that this sent the game careening into copyright limbo, where it is still yet to resurface from its indefinite legal pegging sentence. I find it to be such a shame that this game has been rendered inaccessible because of what is, for the average player, effectively a 5-minute section of the game. Copyright law making everything worse? Never heard that one before. Regardless, as for tweaks, Prey shockingly runs out of box on Windows 10. However, there are some visual issues. By default, the game runs in a lovingly crafted mode specifically designed to simulate nearsightedness. The fix for this involves enough config file edits to make most testosterone-full man cry. That's why, in an act of generosity, I've probably put a download link for my custom config file in the description, because I'd feel like a douche if I didn't supply it. I have no idea if it's perfect, but the game at least won't feel like you're a nearsighted man staring at the sun through a greased-up periscope. To install it, just drop it into the base folder and Prey's directory. You definitely want to tweak the height and width settings if they don't match up with your monitor though, but that should be about it. That should be all the tweaks you need to make in order to enjoy Prey to its technical fullest. You play as a Cherokee Native American man nicknamed Tommy, living on a reservation with his girlfriend Jenny and his grandfather. I'll call him Tommy because it's funnier and easier than his real name. Anyways, yeah, we have a Native American protagonist. This was actually somewhat controversial when Prey was revealed to the public. As far as I'm aware, this is considered to be a good depiction of Native Americans. It is integrated into the story and your abilities, so it's not just crammed in there. Tommy is still kind of bland as a character, but unlike almost every other FPS protagonist, he gets character development, so that's something. His one-liner game isn't great, though. He should work on it. Maybe he could have gotten some game if he would have gotten a second game. Anyways, the game starts off in a bathroom in a bar, casino, combination Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. Some shenanigans go down for a short bit, involving the protagonist asking his girlfriend to elope, beating up some rowdy patrons using a wrench-shaped spoon, and getting abducted by a massive alien sphere. Happens to the best of us. Strapped to the conveyor from the end of Half-Life 2, you get to admire the inside of the meat sphere on your way to pulverization before some random guy blows it up, freeing Tommy and starting the game properly. Now he must rescue his grandfather and girlfriend. Two separate people. Probably has to find a way to avoid being rectally probed too. Before he can do any of that, Tommy's grandfather dies in some weird meat extraction machine. Seems like overkill, but what do I know about meat extraction? He learns his girlfriend has been taken to a lab, so he has to somehow find his way there across MC Escher's space clown slaughterhouse. Then Tommy dies. Yep, he straight up dies. However, he gets better after having a chat with his grandfather in his tribe's spirit world, which gives him the ability to enter the spirit world whenever he pleases. More later. Tommy occasionally receives brief visits from his dead grandfather, usually get berated for wanting to be a regular Joe who only wants to rescue his girlfriend. There's a strong theme of Tommy accepting his heritage, so this is fairly recurrent. With his newfound ancestral powers, he must rescue his girlfriend and stop the sphere from wiping out humanity. It's a pretty straightforward story for the most part, but it does have some twists and major beats to it. I'll talk more about the story later in the spoilers section. Unlike my usual fare, I am doing visuals first because everything in this game is topsy-turvy after all. Prey is a game that aged staggeringly well visually. This came out in 2006, mind, and it still holds up. That's the technological marvel that is id Tech 4's lighting and shadows shining through, maybe my super config file too. I love this engine's harsh shadows, so it's a shame it only ever got a handful of major releases. Modeling and textures are generally excellent, particle effects are good, and very little ever looks dated or out of place. Of course, cracks do start to appear if you look too closely, and the human models in particular are very subpar. Seriously, these human models are jarringly worse than everything else. At least you barely have to look at them. Watch out for your reflection though. How's a 2006 game do mirrors so much better than any modern title? The art style is exceptionally unique. Prey overwhelmingly takes place in this Escher-Giger-esque high-tech spherical meat spaceship. Half of the game is literally meaty to some extent, like you could take a bite out of a lot of the environments, though I doubt you'd leave a good Yelp review afterwards. 1 out of 5 stars, think I caught crabs from eating the flesh cave. It's extremely distinct from the other games on the engine. A spaceship flesh labyrinth is a far more enticing setting than a tech-based simulator that is Doom 3 or the Dark Factory Safari that is Quake 4. I reviewed a game with a similar setting to this one before, Operation Matriarchy. Don't watch my video on it because it's really poorly put together, even by my standards. There I praise the bizarre biomechanical alien feel of that game, and I feel the same way here, though Prey is definitely far more cohesive with its setting. Wait, Operation Matriarchy came first? The Rust and budget jank was technically more original? That's implausibly absurd. It is a fairly grey and brown game at times, though it does compensate with splashes of green, blue, and sometimes red. Prey predates the brown and grey trend, though it still can be very monochromatic at times. The environments aren't overly mixed up, as the bulk of the game takes place in the widening and tightening corridors of an alien spaceship. Sometimes a colon. There's at least a contrast between the meat corridors and the more stereotypical sci-fi corridors, and I do like that. Usually get one or the other. Prey is great at occasionally grounding you in something more normal before hucking you back into the thick of it. The environments are well realized, just don't expect too much variety. Prey setting on an alien spaceship is used to good effect. Some environments feel massive, with Prey emphasizing the sphere being sprawling and labyrinthian. You get to fly a small ship in these massive environments from time to time. Adding to this is the absurdist environments with no clear purpose. Why is there a gravity-defying walkway installed here? What even is this thing? Why does every elevator take 2 people to operate? Is this OSHA compliant? Leaves you wondering in a good way. The sphere is almost beyond comprehension in size and design, which makes it an exceptionally compelling setting. And remember that bathroom I mentioned? Almost everything in there is interactable. I always like seeing this pointless attention to detail, though it's a bit of a bait and switch since almost nothing else in the game rivals this level of interactivity. And speaking of interactivity, I don't know where else to put this, so this game has functional gambling. Kind of a novelty, though it is fun to find a one machine that's uber rigged in your favor. You've got slot machines, blackjack, poker, and Pac-Man. Literally playing a game within a game. There's a dedicated casino mode for those inclined to gamble instead of shooting aliens. It's such a strange addition, but I guess it's neat. One last thing, don't think too much about the butthole doors. As for gameplay, Prey takes a bit after its predecessor, for the lack of a better word, Doom 3, though it has a bit of its own flair. It's still slower paced than shooters of the 90s, but it otherwise strongly takes after them in design. You can play aggressively, you just need to get over that relatively slow base movement speed. I don't think it hurts Prey too badly. The game generally accounts for it. I suppose there were plenty of times where I wished I moved, 27.2% faster. Earth, and more importantly his girlfriend, may be at stake, but Tommy's in no hurry. This movement speed primarily only hurt when I tried to use a shotgun. Can make the tougher melee enemies nastier at times too. Doom 3's sprint feature isn't present here either, which I can live with, and they thankfully removed Doom 3's atrocious flinch. Prey's fundamental movement is a point of contention for me because it's not bad, but there's no depth to it. It lacks the speed of its progenitors, it doesn't have much oomph, and it's not particularly unique, like you don't have any special moves or anything like that. A little bit of a shame. You ask me, Prey's an honorary boomer shooter. You carry your entire arsenal on you at once, there's a nice doses of secrets to find in the linearly structured levels, and you're up against a variety pack of enemies with dodgeable attacks. You can definitely see the mid-aughts game design in there too. It came out in a time period where Half-Life was a big deal, so shooters are becoming slower paced and more story focused. You can certainly see that in Prey with its stopgaps between fights in the form of puzzles, story, and set pieces. More on that in a bit. You've got fixed health here, which regenerates a little if you're critically low. There's no armor, and you're actually relatively frail. You can take some punishment, just not too much. Health is mostly restored by these little one-time use pustules on the ground which spray Vicks Vapor Rub on you or something, I don't know. Sometimes these guys heal you. Do you think they feel existential dread? Enemies, including bosses, are able to use health stations too, so you have to watch out for that. Tying into health is a spirit mode mechanic. You can hit E at any time to switch to your spirit form, which has its own health bar, ghost bow, and theme song. This form is separate from your main body, which can still be hurt during spirit form, so it's no get out of jail free card. Some special characteristics apply to this form, primarily ignoring force fields and certain things that manipulate gravity. You'll largely use this form for puzzles, secrets, and exploration. There's usually an environmental cue when it's appropriate to use it, which is a fantastic touch. However, it does have one more purpose tying back into health. When you die, in quotes, you're sent to the spirit world. Here you need to nail a bunch of spirits with your bow to come back. The more of them you hit, the more health you come back with. You only have so much time before being sucked back to reality, there goes gravity, so you better make those shots count. On hard mode this is the only way to heal, so that's why I played on normal mode since I didn't want to deal with this mechanic all the time. This revival system is an extremely odd inclusion to me. Even ignoring it, Prey is honestly a fairly easy game overall. Almost everything is dodgeable and there are very few prolonged or endurance encounters. You'll largely rely on the pustules for healing, but they're fairly common. Even if you do die, you can potentially come back with full health if your aim is true. I have never fully game overed in this game, assuming it's even possible. Plus you got manual saves and quick saving anyways. I really don't like this revival mechanic. It either needs retooling or to be cut entirely. Oh, and knowing this game is partially derived from Doom 3, you may wonder how much of the game involves holstering your weapon to combat Vin Diesel using a flashlight. I have to make pop culture references to stay relevant even though I know nothing about pop culture, I'm sorry. Well, thankfully, Prey gives you a lighter that operates independently of your primary weapon. Pretty short range, but it generally gets a job done. Relative to Doom 3, Prey is hesitant to force dark rooms on you. I mean, there are still dark areas, but Tommy cracks a one-liner at the expense of Doom 3 when it comes up.
Man. So dark in here. I'm doomed.
Self-awareness doesn't help your case when you're doing almost exactly what you're making fun of, but whatever. Also, you get a pet ghost eagle, Talon. He sometimes distracts enemies in combat, but his primary use is translating alien terminals for you. You know, that thing that birds are known for doing? Cute thematic addition, I guess. Now for something more interesting, the arsenal. It's a small arsenal consisting of 8 weapons including the spirit form bow. The bow is exactly what you'd expect, though it uses health as ammo, so I inherently don't care for it. Not like you'll use it often anyways. So despite the small size of your arsenal, it's still fairly satisfying and well-rounded. Most of these weapons are weapons you're likely used to seeing, but Prey is fairly clever with its presentation. Despite that, your ammo counter is an unmarked bar, so you only have a vague notion of how much ammo you have at any given time. This game is fairly generous with ammo, so you shouldn't be too worried about running dry. I don't understand its design choice, but at least there's technically no weapon reloading to worry about. Anyways, I'll go over the guns in some weird order not yet understood by man. Starting off, we have the Hunter Rifle, the second weapon you find. This thing is super reliable and versatile with abundant ammo, probably gonna be one of your most frequently used weapons. Primary fire is a standard fully auto machine gun firing mode, but the alt fire transforms it into a potent sniper rifle. Deals good damage with each firing mode, so it's a decent one-size-fits-all weapon. It's got a meaty firing sound, a clicky barrel, and those strange meaty lips on the front. And the way to scope is basically just a tentacle that slurpily meanders its way up to your face. Great stuff, love this thing, man. Moving along, there's the Leech Gun, which is the most unique weapon Prey has, at least in concept. It can only get shot power from specialty charging stations scattered about the levels, coming in 4 different fruity flavors. From a fairly standard plasma machine gun, to a cryo flamethrower, to an electric railgun, to a massive freaking laser. The railgun and laser are incredible, immensely satisfying to use all around because of their top-notch feedback, power, and sound work. Not too fond of the plasma machine gun and cryo flamethrower in comparison. Neither are bad, but who wants a flamethrower over a giant laser? Worst flamethrower on my channel so far, but it's still not half bad. How's this streak of viable flamethrowers still going? The Leech Gun is ultimately yet another lovely weapon. Too bad about that relatively generic appearance though. I don't know, I like the biomechanical stuff. But my favorite of all the weapons has to be the autocannon. You gotta pull this Dollar General Cyber Demon by the arm to get it. This weird bionicle recreation of a Cyber Demon is the least original thing in this game by far, though I always liked the Cyber Demon design, so I get it. As for the autocannon itself, the primary fires an extremely powerful minigun, and the secondary fires an extremely powerful grenade launcher. The grenades do have fairly wimpy range, though that's a minor complaint because of how ridiculously meaty this thing is otherwise. Meaty in more ways than one. I love how it looks super Scythe-ness. I also like the weird inexplicable bit of electricity coming out the top of the weapon. It's kind of a chef's kiss. You'll see me using this thing a lot because I like me a good Swiss cheesifying minigun. It's quite ammo efficient, so you get to play with it a lot. Like any good minigun, nothing can withstand it. There's these spiders, which are basically just glorified grenades. These things are definitely below average as far as grenades go, but they at least do neat damage when they do work. The throwing arc is short and awkward, and they don't explode on contact, so I'm not a big fan. Tommy throws them underhanded, to best put it. Alt fires a proximity mine, which isn't very useful in this game. I do like the design though. I always like the idea of weapons that are just wildlife picked up off the floor. Why spider explode? Does spider have boom boom? Good questions, but they are cute, and I kinda want to scratch their, chins? You then have the acid sprayer, which is the obligatory shotgun of this game's arsenal. You get it oddly later on, so this game narrowly avoided violating Doom's Law. Deals fairly decent damage, range isn't too bad, and it's aggressively green. Alt fire sucks though, it's just a weirdly weak and ammo inefficient explosive blast. I feel like I'm experiencing deja vu right now. I wonder what game I've talked about before had something like this. There's also the Crawler Cannon, which is a fairly standard rocket launcher that mostly just looks cool. It has an oddball alt fire that creates a protective shield which enemies can use against you. I hate that. I don't use it often, though I can't tell you why. I think I just forget I have it sometimes. It's not a great rocket launcher, not a bad one either. The worst weapon is the melee weapon, the wrench. It's a retroactive reference to Prey 2017, or maybe an insult to it, I don't know. It's the obligatory infinite ammo fallback melee weapon, which means it couldn't kill a cockroach even when swung at terminal velocity. By Hercules. Overall, I do quite like Prey's arsenal. You only have a handful of weapons, but they're fun to use and they fulfill every niche you'd want your arsenal to fulfill. Even if the weapon itself isn't particularly hard-hitting, it's usually aesthetically pleasing and sounding. Well, okay, except the wrench. Using that only fixes the combat against you. Regardless, it's quite fun to rapidly swap between weapons when appropriate and unleash havoc. Like I've said, Prey feels surprisingly old school, and its arsenal is a big part of that. A lot of fun, old school action to be had here. Now I should address this game's gimmicks. Technically not all of these relate to gravity, but do you have a better triple alliteration title for this section? Anyways, Prey is what I like to term a variety pack shooter. Variety pack shooter is just my informal name for this specific design philosophy where the game tries to vary things up extremely frequently. 2 consecutive rooms rarely feature the same trick, so everything is constantly shifting. Games designed like this often feel like perpetual highlight reels, with competent ones never really wasting the player's time. Even a downtime between battles often has gimmicks or puzzles. A lot of other games of this design philosophy usually just use it as an excuse to throw turret sections or bad takes on Valve-esque physics puzzles at you. Luckily, Prey was designed by people who realized it would be cooler to pilot a spaceship than a turret. You have anti-gravity walkways you attach to automatically, allowing you to effectively walk on walls or upside down. These are one of the more frequent gimmicks in Prey, and they are used to pretty interesting effect. There are plenty of little environmental puzzles using these things, sometimes needing you to use spirit form while your physical form is stuck on them to go do something else. Enemies can use these too, often spawning on them and shooting at you from above. I do find it a bit of a shame that you don't have too many unique battles on these, since the game usually just teleports a standard soldier or two onto them. They're overwhelmingly straight lines too, so you don't have too much freedom of movement on them. Still love the concept and execution, especially because it actually does induce a sense of vertigo at times. I simply wish the combat encounters on them were more fleshed out. Heh, fleshed. A renowned bit of technology is the portals, which have been part of Prey since its earliest iteration. You can see the other side of any portal, which is pretty cool. What makes them more interesting is their non-Euclidean, sometimes subtle nature. They are used to great effect in one of my favorite set pieces in this game, the Hallway of Mirrors. It's a short maze of sorts that uses these portals in a really fun way. I think it greatly benefits from the fact that you can actually use the portals to your advantage in combat. AI definitely gets his brain more racked here than any human would though. Also, you can shoot yourself through the mirrors. If you've played this game before, you definitely tried that too. Then there's the strange gravity pads that you can shoot to make the environment go all topsy-turvy. The environment reorients itself based on the direction the pad is relative to you, which creates some fun confusion and dizziness from time to time. Unfortunately, these are outright never used in combat. Kind of a shame, because I wanted a first-person shooter Escher-Giger fight. Will my target audience get that reference? Probably not. And lastly, there's the spaceship sections. Technically, these ships ignore gravity, so it's a gravity-related gimmick anyways. These sections generally never outstate their welcome and control surprisingly smoothly. Combat in them is kinda and you do need to solve some puzzles, to be generous, using a tractor beam. They have a fuel gauge and not much fuel. Guess even in the sphere, gas prices are awful. Probably a remnant from an older build of the game? No clue, but you do need to grab new spaceships often because they both run out of gas quickly and they're fairly frail. You mostly fight these guys with like homing MIRVs in them. It's a little obnoxious. Since they just vaporize when you get out, they're probably somewhat environmental friendly. I don't know. They're disposable like anything else that's environmentally friendly. I guess there is a fairly unifying issue with the gimmicks, and it's that the game doesn't toy around with them in combat too much. Sure, Prey does have plenty of interesting little puzzles and fun sections. I also can't say I didn't have fun fighting regular soldiers while upside down. I just wish these combat encounters were more varied. Maybe they thought it would be a bad idea to have you fight something intense under the duress of potential dizziness? Really wish you had like a upside down battle with a knockoff cyber demon. Game would have instantly shot up a letter grade in my book. Plus, it has that Half-Life 2 problem where it doesn't really combine its gimmicks. You usually only have to approach one at a time. Deviations overwhelmingly involve you channeling your spirit form on an anti-gravity walkway to hit a button or access a stash. I really wish the game explored the mind-bending factor more and went all out with it. I guess these gimmicks would be hard to make work in conjunction with each other, but still, missing potential. Despite that, my thoughts on these gimmicks are very much positive. I was always welcoming of the gimmick sections, and the game obviously has some fun with its tricks. Prey always keeps you guessing, as it consistently tries new things with its gimmicks and frequently swaps between them. They're undoubtedly one of the defining elements of the game. I just stick by wishing you got to fight the AliExpress Cyber Demon while upside down. When Prey isn't trying to make you dizzy, how's it fare? Well, the combat is primarily held up by its satisfying weapons, gimmicks, and the old school style enemy design. It's most apparent in fights that are free from the aforementioned gimmicks. There are fun arenas here and there, but their design is, more often than not, extremely open and not particularly clever or interesting. Some occasional corridor fights too. You move rather slow in comparison to the size of a lot of the open arenas, which leads to extremes of fights either being fought in the open or cheesed with one piece of cover. Still, there's plenty of fun encounters. I generally had the most fun in close range battles where you can play super aggressively, rapidly swapping between weapons and picking off enemies as they warp in. That happens in some open arenas here and there too. You can see aspects of great encounter design like flanking routes, varied cover, sightline variety, etc. It's just a bit uncommon. It's a case where the level design is fantastic in some areas, milquetoast in almost all of the others. To be clear, Prey is one of those games where there's nothing abjectly bad about a lot of the encounter design, but it really relies on its gimmicks and surprises to craft its interesting and memorable moments. The bulk of the level design quality is in those gimmicks and tricks, and only occasionally does it truly shine in its more general combat arenas. It's a bit of a similar case to Halo Infinite, where the gameplay is held up by its other aspects more so than its actual encounter design. As I said earlier, Prey's enemies are also fairly old school in their design, being a lot like what you'd expect from a 90s shooter. You got soldiers that shoot grenades and throw rifles at you, basically assault commanders from Duke Nukem, various ranks of melee chargers, turrets from Turretville, which is one of the deepest layers of hell, etc. If you're the first-person shooter equivalent of being well-read, then just about every goon here will be familiar to you. There are some cleverly designed enemies, most notably the ones that travel between these moist wall canals. Too bad about them using a rocket launcher and its alt-fire shield against you. I hate that more than the Wallacees they come out of. The soldiers are at least well designed to compensate for being a bit too common. Notably, they throw grenades, use alt-fires, interact with buttons, use healing pustules, and even grab spaceships when they can. can easily wail on you if you aren't aggressive in taking them down, so they're at least fairly compelling to fight. And as someone who hates damage sponges, I'm happy to say that most enemies in this game don't have an exceptional amount of health, with one major exception I'll briefly talk about in the spoiler section. This goes a long way towards lending most weapons a sense of power. Very few of the enemies are bad, and they're typically either mediocre or a bit above average in terms of design. I do hate the weird spirit eagles in particular though. I have no idea how you're supposed to handle them, but they're also not very threatening. Eventually they just tire of you, screech God bless America, and go back to heaven or wherever. They're the only enemy I outright hate, and they're only a minor nuisance, so that should tell you something about the quality enemy roster. I have repeatedly mentioned puzzles throughout this video. There's actually a decent handful of them in Prey. They're fairly straightforward though. Nothing here is exceptionally brain busting, and they're usually more for pacing purposes than anything else. This puzzling is where the game explores its gimmicks the most. There are some prolonged puzzle segments here and there, though they never overtake the combat. I'm surprised that the puzzles are so minimalist for the most part, but they end up being satisfying breaks between fights. Since you have spirit form, the sky's almost the limit with the kind of confusing puzzles this game could have had. I can imagine an alternative reality where Prey is a great puzzle game instead of a great action game. It does tie back into my missing potential comment from earlier, but complex puzzling isn't something I look forward to when I play an FPS, so it's all fine. There's thankfully only one horrible environmental puzzle in this game. It's this crate puzzle, which requires you to push 2 boxes across the room, which also flips now and then. You push things at the speed and strength of a quadruple amputee, so this is basically just a couple minutes of nothing happening. It's clear what you need to do, but it's less fun than pushing crates around in real life. To contrast that, this puzzle with a giant cube is particularly beloved. It's one of the more involved puzzles in the game, mostly because I always have to spend 2 minutes throwing myself around to remember what I'm supposed to do. It's a cool puzzle, it just needs to do a better job establishing your end goal. It's fun to solve, and with a bit of brute force, it shouldn't take too long to figure it out. I like it, it's a cool use of the game's gimmicks. So, in short, Prey's encounter design can be a bit middling, but it's never bad. The level design is ultimately held up by the old school combat, unique gimmicks and set pieces, high variety, and straightforward but interesting puzzles. There's plenty of good fights, but a decent handful of the less significant fights tend to blend together. In the end, I wish a bit of the love and care that went into most of this game was more evenly distributed among the combat arenas, because otherwise everything is great here. Sound design will be a quick section as per usual. Of course, you can't really talk about the sound in this game without acknowledging the fact that its soundtrack was composed by Jeremy Soule of Elder Scrolls fame. Symphonic music like this tends to blend together for me, so I think I'm one of the worst people to ask about its quality. I assume it's good, I just remember almost none of it. Interestingly, the original version of this game was going to have a German metal soundtrack, so I feel like we ultimately lost something here. Of course, there's also the licensed music I mentioned before. Most notably, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, the band I was informed isn't actually a one-hit wonder. Too bad about the licensed music damning this game to purgatory. Was it worth it? But something that didn't curse this game is the general weapon sounds. They're quite fantastic. You can tell a lot of love went into making all these weapons sound distinct and powerful. It's hard to describe it without experiencing it yourself, it's just that everything sounds appropriately potent or at least unique and memorable. Though as much as I love the clicky barrel on the Hunter rifle, I don't care for the fact that it's also a weird proto-reload that you have no control over. I guess I forgot to mention that. But hey, a minor gameplay annoyance can always be redeemed by rotating barrel ASMR. Here's a quick highlight reel. The general sound design is excellent. Enemies, pickups, and weapons all have distinct sounds. Ambience is good, there's nice little warnings for being low on ammo or health, stomping around on anti-gravity walkways always felt strangely satisfying, and so forth. Everything simply has a good feel to it, and I have no real complaints about most of it. Voice acting is fairly passable for the most part. Tommy has some awkwardly delivered lines, but nothing particularly egregious.
I feel good.
Hey, stop that thing!
Man, so dark in here. I'm doomed.
Interestingly, they got Art Bell to play himself on here, where you get to hear about what's happening on Earth through some of the alien terminals. I like this, it's a fun little connection to real life that makes the scale of the sphere and what's doing more understandable. It's a rare case of an appropriate celebrity appearance in the video game. It's actually fairly neat. Anyway, it's time for story spoilers, so skip to this timestamp to skip them. You good? The people who skipped are in for some inevitable disappointment when they actually play this game's final stretch. So a couple hours into the game, Tommy finds a tribe of humans that has managed to somehow survive on the sphere. What they eat and drink on here, I think I'd rather not know. They ask him to kill the keeper and help lead him to his girlfriend. He rescues her, brings her back, and the tribe's been curb stomped by alien forces in the meantime. They've been up here for like 1,000 years and get killed off by about 10 foot soldiers. Anyways, Damsel ends up being kidnapped again within only about 5 minutes of being reunited, and from there it's about rescuing her again. Don't worry, this is the only princesses in another castle moment in this game. After another large segment of the game building up to finding your girlfriend again, it's revealed she's been strogified. Now you have to fight her in a terrible boss fight. I find this really hard, yet somehow, no matter how badly I play, I never die. Her melee attack is nearly undodgeable, and she has an unholy amount of health, as you'd expect from a cyborg flesh frog person. She's got invulnerability phases too, because someone at Human Head really hated me despite me being a first grader at the time of release. Tommy kills his flesh cyborg abominationified girlfriend and gets so angry that he revisits his grandfather to get a health upgrade, the first and only stat upgrade in the game. After that, he goes back to the sphere to kill it. You're forced into using the leech gun from now on because of how rare other ammo becomes. Their chargers suddenly start recharging, which they never did before, so bonus points for inconsistency. Reminds me of the last level of Half-Life 2, where it's probably supposed to be a power trip, but it's not that fun because you're almost forced into using a single weapon the whole time. You finally encounter the Keeper, who has ostensibly been the antagonist this whole time. It reveals the sphere created humanity as a food source and is interested in serving man. Its fight is a boss rush, followed up with a damage sponge that warps about and shoots triple shots. A bit disappointing. But wait! He's not the actual antagonist. In the next few rooms, there's a small army of keepers. Yep, you gotta kill double-digit numbers of this spongy, unfun death ostrich. The best part of a power trip boss rush section is spending half of it waiting on invulnerability phases to pass and for ammo to regenerate. Oh wait, no, that's freaking wrong. After that gauntlet of depravity, you make it to the sphere inside the sphere. After a really easy and drawn out puzzle, you meet the sphere itself. I can't show you much of this part of the game because you can literally see her breasts. Add that to the boob counter. Does anyone like this running joke? Anyways, the sphere is a human woman who is apparently a badass protagonist you never got to play as, which is exactly why her boss fight is an effortless two-phase puzzle battle that I never took any damage in. Prey's final boss is anticlimactic, and the final stretches in general ultimately makes minimal use of the game's best aspects. It really falls apart in these last 30 minutes for me. So, in killing her, Tommy becomes a controller of the sphere. It's like Santa Claus. After being berated by his grandfather one last time, Tommy chooses to fly the sphere into the sun. He gets better afterwards. He briefly reunites with his girlfriend in the spirit world before just kinda going back to work at the bar from the start of the game. Then a character from that sphere tribe I mentioned earlier visits to G-Man him into the sequel that's totally coming out in the near future, and roll credits. Prey's story is alright for how minimal it generally is. It's structurally pretty typical for a damsel in distress on an alien meat sphere story. I do like the little twist of Tommy being Native American and having to accept his heritage as the game goes on. It's pretty rare for John protagonists to get any form of character development in these sorts of games, so it's a nice deviation from the norm. Too bad the final part of the game is often described by intellectuals as being poopy, and the blatant sequel hook at the end is yet to be resolved, partially thanks to the tenuous quantum existence of Prey 2. And Prey 2017. I doubt we'll ever get a true sequel, but even if we did, it probably wouldn't feel the same without the sphere. So, Prey 2006. It's an excellent game, certainly worth a rather high price of admission. It's my favorite meat sphere simulator out there, that's for sure. It may be a bit of a product of its time in some ways, but it has aged profoundly well. It's still fun to go back and replay it, even having seen all the surprises before. Speaking of surprises, do note I have deliberately avoided showing off a decent chunk of this game, so you can still be caught off guard by some things. Prey is unfortunately relatively short at about 6 hours long, but very little of that time is time wasted. It doesn't have an excess of cutscenes or nothing happening or anything like that. It's a game that understands it shouldn't pull you out of the action for too long, and that slow moments are still opportunities to have some fun. I do think level design and enemy design needed a bit more polish at times, but that really doesn't hurt my overall opinion of the game that much. I don't have much more to say, so I'll simply say I recommend Prey. Now, I do have a small channel update. I now have a Ko-fi page and an email you can send messages to. Both are linked in the description below. Admittedly, I'm not super likely to take game requests, but I will look into them if I can. Just a forewarning, even now, my upload schedule is super sporadic and will likely only get more sporadic before the end of the year. I'm somebody who can take 10 minutes to write a 3-sentence email because someone else is gonna see it, so it should be perfect, right? Now that I have almost 150 subscribers, I feel that pressure a lot more than back when my videos got like 10 views on average. I mean, I wouldn't call myself popular, but you know. Still, I appreciate you guys. It's a good encouragement to keep this going. See you in the next video where I'll review an incredibly Halloweeny game out of season, starring an Irish protagonist. Take a guess what it is. See you then. These birds.